Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And you want to get more information and listen to previous shows, you can do so at our website, www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Susan Reinhardt, an author and humorist, among other things. And Susan, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. So that is Susan, and it's such a pleasure.
Thank you, Blaine. Thank you for having me. We go way back.
I was thinking that, Susan, we were just talking off the air. It's quite a ways back. Susan Reinhardt is a best-selling author known for her taking serious topics and infusing them with humor and heart. She's especially praised for creating a cast of unforgettable, quirky characters who stay to readers' minds long after the final page. Her latest novel, which we'll be talking about, The Beautiful Misfit, I have to get it in there, is out now. And Susan lives in the Blue Ridge Mountains near Asheville, and it's on her second and final husband. Great line.
Yeah, final, right.
Okay, I'm on second and final wife. Where I should digress, you've never heard me say this. I'll ask you the question. How long have you guys been married?
We've been together 18 years, and we've probably been married 14.
Okay, ask me how long I've been married.
No,
ask me.
No. How long, Blaine, have you been married to your beautiful bride, Cynthia?
Not long enough.
Oh,
and we also
your answer is better.
Exactly. Well, you can steal it, Susan, but we also tell it. Cynthia tells it, so this way she doesn't have to remember the number of years. She just says,
I love it.
Not long enough. Susan has 2 grown children, 3 stepchildren, and a granddaughter. She prides herself on the ability to ride a unicycle and twirl a baton at the same time. And I've actually seen you do that, right?
You
did
have.
That on stage. Well, I got so many questions I want to ask you, Susan, but first of all, I should ask you, how do you learn how to twirl, ride a tricycle and twirl
a unicycle?
Yeah, how do you try unicycle harder? How do you learn that?
I grew up in a little town, probably maybe 25,000 people, so it wasn't that small, but it was in Georgia, right, maybe an hour from Atlanta, and there wasn't a whole lot to do. My cousin was 13 and she got a unicycle, and you know what the first cousin has, I wanted to have. And I think when you start really young, 12 or 13, and you have agility, and when you fall down you don't break a hip, I started riding it. It took about a week to learn, and the best place to learn was at the tennis courts, where you could grab onto the chain link fence. So, and then the baton twirling just sort of, in the South, people have quirky talents. And if you ever watched Miss Congeniality, and Sandra Bullock did the glassware for her talent. If I were ever in a pageant, which I was not, I would have had to twirl and ride a unicycle at the same time.
Well, I have to say, I actually had the pleasure of seeing you do this, and we just talk a little bit about that, because that's one of my favorite moments with Susan Reinhardt. You actually did a show at Asheville Community Theater. Talk a little bit about that. This is a fun show.
Well, that was about maybe it was close to, gosh, it's been 10 years.
Yeah, it must have been, right.
And looking back, I can't believe I had the nerve to do that. I don't know that I'd be able to do it today, because it was a one-woman show right after I lost my job as a columnist for 27 years at the paper. And Jerry Crouch was sort of really involved at that point.
Right.
And he also had written or had worked at the paper, and he got me the gig, and it turned out really well. I was nervous, very nervous, but after maybe the first 30 minutes, I felt comfortable.
Well,
it took that long.
For the benefit of people who didn't see the show, it was you were this one-woman show, not only writing it, I can't believe you did that on stage, but you also, you were doing at the time you were doing Sarah Palin. right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
so I meant to ask you not to get into political discussion here, but you were probably crushed when Palin lost again, because you could have made a comeback,
I could have, I'm not saying I agree or disagree with her
right?
politics. However, it would have been nice. I might have gotten some more gigs.
Exactly. But that's such a great gig. And so I knew you in that show. I read religiously your column for the Citizen
Thank
Times.
you. I
No
appreciate
offense,
it.
no offense to the Citizen Times, but with you were gone, and then when John left, John Boyle,
Mhm.
that was, I don't read the paper anymore because it was us. It used to be, remember great days of newspaper. It used to be
Yeah.
a 32-page, 40-page paper. Now it's 8, 10, whatever.
It's like, you know what? It's like one ply cheap toilet paper. That's exactly how it is. And John, and I loved him so much, I still do. He's, with the Asheville
right.
Watchdog now, continuing the Answer Man column.
And doing a great job with it. Yeah, I
Yep.
just love it. But
Yep.
it's almost, in a way, you got out at kind of a good time, as it turns out, because
Right.
it's
I
just
mean, I was really upset for about 3.5 hours,
right.
and then it turned around.
Yeah. But just great calm. Let me ask you that then, in terms of growing up. So as a child, did you always want to be a writer?
Um, I think it started about the time of the unicycle riding, Blaine. Um, I was in love with an 18-year-old lifeguard at the pool, and he would have nothing to do with me except make fun of how big my ears were. He called me mule ears. And so I got a red notebook and I started writing the absolute worst poetry you've ever read. It was that unrequited angst love stuff. So from that time, I started with the poetry and then went into the short stories, wrote a play that we put on in high school, never wrote another one, and then started doing short stories in journalism.
You're giving me an idea, Susan, to add you to this list of people who I want to get together at either Asheville Community Theater or some other local theater, and everybody would
Uh-huh.
do their first production. Like, wouldn't that be cool? You said that play. Do we have a
I
videotape?
tore mine up.
Oh, did you really? Oh,
No, it's somewhere. It's somewhere.
but wouldn't that be too cool
It
if
would.
we could revisit this play they wrote all these
Right.
years? But let me ask you this: talking about poetry. So, do you still write poetry?
Not if I'm only if I'm forced to, like when I'm writing a novel, if there is some sort of letter or poem that a character has to write, then I'll dust off those skills or
Well,
lack of skill.
well, we should digress a little bit though, because I don't know if you've seen it, but with AI, it's incredible that I can now write poems, and I can
Don't
write.
even get me on AI.
Okay, we'll talk about that over coffee one day. But it's just
Okay.
I'll get on it. It's just incredible. Cynthia, my beautiful bride, is very impressed. I'll write her a poem.
Uh,
Takes me 3 seconds, Susan, and it's
Are they good?
some are damn good. I'll have to send you a
Okay.
sample. But I
Oh,
mean,
please do.
really, can you imagine that whole, like I said, we'll have to talk about it sometime, but boy, it changes, the nature of
Mhm.
things. So you started writing in high school. Do you remember the very first thing was ever published?
Well, probably the articles when I went to the University of Georgia, go dogs. Um, I was a geek and I worked for the Red and Black, which was the college paper. So it was a police story. I can't remember, but I absolutely do remember the very first column I wrote. And it was during an internship at the Spartanburg Herald Journal in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where my parents, they're in their 80s, they still live. So I was doing an internship. It was the summer, pretty new on the paper, and they sent me to an air show, airplanes doing tricks. And this, I don't know if he was drinking or what, but his name was Bird, Byrd, and he was a pilot. And a pilot named Bird, and he asked me if I wanted to go up in his plane. There were no, there might have been kind of a window. There was no structure, no fuselage, so to speak of. It was open air. So I said, sure. I wasn't thinking that I didn't have permission or form signed by the paper. So I went up in the plane with him, and, he did dives and aerial flips, and I wrote a column about that. Got in trouble, but it sparked a huge interest in doing more.
Why'd you get in trouble from the paper?
Yes, because if the plane had crashed and I hadn't signed liability waivers, ooh, they would have been in trouble.
Well, so I guess one of the lessons you learned from then is to get liability coverage or
I
something.
learned always cover your behind.
CYA, but that is so cool. So, and that you did a lot of that though, Susan. It just your columns always used to be very personalized columns. You know, it seemed to you, whoever you were writing about, you really got into their lives.
Immersion journalism, right?
But
Immersive.
it really is. So is that
Mhm.
is that what you pride yourself on?
Well, I enjoy doing that. I like doing first person columns, but I also liked hearing, I'm so nosy and I love hearing people. I really love hearing people's stories. I could just listen, especially elderly people. I could just listen to them all day, and used to volunteer in nursing homes when I was younger, and even worked in one when I was in nursing school for a hot minute. And so I just like to tell people stories, and I like to tell my own and embellish them and make them funny.
Because again, what I love about your column, that every day it was something new, you know, something different, or people I
Thank
didn't
you.
know. Yeah, it was just I just loved the column, and that must have been that was probably the toughest part about not writing the column. That you had to all of a sudden one day stop writing the column.
I did. It was very sudden. In fact, I was on vacation and I was called in, and I thought, well, they're going to give me a raise. And unfortunately, unfortunately, they gave me the door and a bunch of other really great journalists. We survived the first, half dozen layoffs, but not this one. And, I could have done a blog. I started one called Susan Uncensored. And
Okay, I remember.
on my website, I have 3 column blogs that I did, if anybody wants to read them.
What you 3 total? You mean?
Yep, and then I stopped. I really want to get back to it, but I
Well,
find writing fiction is kind of my passion now instead of columns. I segued into that.
now let's talk a little bit about that. I don't know if it was the first book you read, or was that the reading, but that was the book, I guess, before this one. Trying to say if it's in the front of it. Talk about your writing of fiction, Susan. How'd you get into that?
It started, probably I was in Myrtle Beach. I was writing for the Myrtle Beach Sun News, covering all kinds of, police, education, and I had to do the weather and the obits. That was my first job out of college. And one thing about the weather, when you're doing the weather forecast in Myrtle Beach, you couldn't say anything except it will be partly cloudy with a chance of showers. We couldn't tell people it was going to rain all day because they would pack up and leave. And when anybody would get bitten back then by sharks, obvious sharks, we could not say that they had shark bites. We had to call them unidentified marine animals. So anyway, I met this man. He was 20 years older, and he became my first fiance. I didn't marry him, but he was so odd and charming and eccentric that my first book, which I didn't try to get published, was called A Duke of Habit because he had so many weird habits. And I wrote it longhand in a yellow legal pad. I still have it somewhere.
So it was never published, though?
No, but I may dig it out if I can read my handwriting from back then.
Well, by the way, an aside, yeah, I have the same problem. You know, I almost have to type. Do you have the same problem? I have to type everything now because I can't read my writing. You know,
Now I do, right? But back then we didn't have computers.
right?
We had electric typewriters and the predecessor to the modern laptop.
Well, you know, it's funny. An aside, you talk about not being able to read your writing. I'm fearful, Susan, if they ever, get tight on voting, they have to match your signature. I'm going to be in a lot of trouble.
Tell them you'll type it.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I'm going to be trouble there too, because I love that. It's a shame you didn't publish that book, but it sounds like a great story.
Yeah, he was a big influence in my writing because he loved to read fiction, and he would, he gave me A Confederacy of Dunces, that book. I don't know if you've read it, but if you love humor, excuse me, I've had a cold. If you love humor, you do need to read A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, and it was written in 1960, I believe, and he won the Pulitzer for it after he had already committed suicide because no one would publish his novel.
Oh, really? That's some story.
And it won the Pulitzer and it's just the most brilliant satire that I've read. Try it.
So talk about your first novel that got published.
That got published because
Yeah.
there are 3 in the drawer that,
Oh,
I have a few that I sent out tentatively when I was in my late 20s, early 30s. The first one to get published was Chimes from a Cracked Southern Belle, and it came out exactly 2 months prior to me being laid off. So I had that to fall back on, and I promoted that book, and it won a medal in the Independent Publishers contest for best Southern fiction. So it did really well, and I loved writing it.
now that's one I read, I think, that you did the reading at?
Yes, you came to that book
Right.
launch at the Mill Room. It was part of Asheville Pizza and Brewery, I think. It was
Something
owned
like
by
that.
Mike Rangel, I believe.
Yeah.
It was called the Mill Room.
That's where it was. But that was such
Yes.
a fun book though. I loved it though.
Thank you.
And then what was really cool about it, because even though it's fiction, and I should ask you this, how much of that is based on, in general, when you write fiction, how much of it is based on real life?
With Chimes from a Cracked Southern Belle, the mother character,
Right.
Lucinda, she was loosely based on my mother. There are a lot of differences, but there are some similarities. But Aunt Weepy, the crazy aunt that would crash funerals for the food and to meet men, she was probably 50% real, my Aunt Betty, but my mother was, that character, Lucinda, was probably 20% my mom, but Aunt Weepy, 50% my aunt.
Now
And
talk about both those people. I always wonder about this. What was their reaction? Did your mom ever read the book?
she did. Now her eyesight's kind of bad now, so with the Beautiful Misfits, she has a huge, magnifying glass, and she's
Right.
getting through it very slowly. My dad sped through it, and he approved it. Mom, I think she really liked it. Mom used to be my mother used to be my editor in the early days of writing books, and I had to fire her from her editing because if she saw a cuss word or something she thought wasn't ladylike, she would mark it out and say, "Now, Susan, you can act better than that."
So
So
she lost her job. Okay.
she did.
But at least she read the book afterward. So talk about that reaction to that book, because again, I was just blown away by it. You had I think, an excellent reaction to it.
I did, and it's still, I republished it myself. It was with a publisher, and after a certain amount of years, you can get your rights back, and I did, and I got a new cover for it. And last year, I sold the audio rights to it, so now Chimes from a Cracked Southern Belle is on audio. Tantor Media bought the rights.
Because
So it's still floating around. I mean, the book's 10 years old, but it has a little, it doesn't need the defibrillator paddles yet.
But back to your other 3 books you said are in a drawer, good or bad, that's one of the nice things about Amazon. At least you can publish a book on your own.
Right.
It used to be, it was impossible to get book published, or very expensive, where you have to buy 1,000 copies, before anybody would publish it, self-publishing. But now, and I've done a couple, you can do it on your own for like nothing. So I do want to see those first 3 books sometime.
So you have some on Amazon? You've done some?
Yeah, joke books, and just knock them out.
Oh, okay.
But it's so easy to do, and it's no cost, which is nice if you just want to get them published. But after you wrote
You
that
make more money if you do it yourself. You definitely do.
By the way, you can, especially with Amazon, you got to push it like crazy, whatnot. But it used to be it was impossible to get published, very hard and very laborious,
Right.
very time consuming, you didn't make a lot of money. But now it's
No.
interesting. You brought back the rights, and we'll see what
Hmm.
happens. So after you got that book back again, or it's out, I'm trying to think, was there anything between that and The Beautiful Misfits?
There was a job,
Oh,
and the
came in
job
that?
there, you know, I was wanting to write another novel, and I had some ideas in mind. And then maybe I'd say less than a year, or right at a year. It was right at a year after I was laid off that I took a job with Lancome. Some people call it Lancome, which is a high-end French cosmetics luxury skincare line, and they're in all the big department stores internationally. It's a Paris company, and so they flew me to New York City, and I trained to be a makeup artist. So that's sort of a big departure, you would think, from journalism to, you know, slinging eyebrow pencils and promises.
But you enjoyed it though, right?
I loved it. And it's a setting. I used the cosmetic setting in The Beautiful Misfits. And those scenes are very, probably 70% real. I embellished to make some characters a lot funnier at the makeup counters in the mall. But it was working for Lancome was wonderful. They celebrated diversity and people of all ages. I mean, a lot of us lost our jobs pretty much from blatant ageism. We were getting a bigger salary, we had retirement, and they could get younger workers cheaper. But Lancome, they hired us oldies.
Well, quite,
And
and that,
it was really fun. I mean, quirky, just the quirkiest people, the most wonderful people would come to the counters or would work behind the counters. It was always a story.
but even that, it's a shame. We were talking off there, I think, about AI and how industries have changed.
Hmm.
Even cosmetics, has changed with, Amazon, if you will. That it's,
Yep.
it used to be department stores. As a kid, you probably grew up in department stores. I did,
Hmm.
and now,
Hmm.
Susan, I've been to a department store in a long, long time. So it's maybe that too. You got it at the right time. Because
Yeah.
that I imagine industry has suffered a lot of layoffs and cutbacks,
Since COVID,
and
I
COVID too.
worked I worked there, up until COVID. And I've only been to the mall once since COVID, not because I'm afraid or
Right.
anything like that, but I'm like you, I shop online at various places. And I think that's where the world is going now, because the
You said
mall was pretty much empty.
right. So same thing too, as well. So let's now talk then about Beautiful Misfits. So this was your second book. You wrote it.
Mhm.
Did you write it during COVID, or a lot of it during COVID?
I edited it. That's hard to say, edited. I edited the book during COVID and did some rewrites and some drafting. It took me 5 years to write it because I was doing a lot of research into the opioid epidemic, and I interviewed people in recovery and those still in active addiction. And I went to treatment centers to see how they all worked before I created my own treatment center in The Beautiful Misfit. So, because the topic is a little heavy, about it deals with the mom whose son was gripped. He had a sports injury, a tennis injury, and he had his wisdom teeth out, and he got a prescription for pain pills. And I said something like, big pharma pushed it, and genetics pollinated it, and it happens to so many really good people. They have an injury, or they're sick, their back hurts or whatever, and they take the opioids. And now the opioid epidemic is killing more young people than guns and car accidents combined, because it's laced with fentanyl. And fentanyl is almost 50 to 100 times more powerful than morphine. And one hit laced with this would be your last. So many overdoses from that.
And the problem, I guess, because I haven't studied like you have, but the problem, I guess, is that most people don't know if they're getting something that's going to
They
create,
don't. And,
right?
you're never going to cure anything completely, but there are tools to save lives when these ruthless drug dealers cut things with fentanyl. They have test strips where you could test the product before you even, ideally you wouldn't buy anything off the streets anyway, but there are measures to save lives like Narcan. It's pretty standard now. It'll reverse opiate overdose.
So when you're writing this book, I mean, that's a little scary to some people. That took you 5 years to finish the book. When you write,
Mm-hmm.
do you write like, are you a writer that gets up every morning at 7 o'clock and writes for 3 hours, or how do you write?
I do now. But back then, like I told you, I was
Right.
working for Longcomb, and I still had kids. They were teenagers, and they had their activities. So I just packed away. I got the first draft done during not National Novel Writing Month. So I knocked out 50,000 crappy words in 30 days and then polished it over time.
So,
But with
yeah,
the novel that I'm shopping right now, it's my first romantic comedy. It's called Rebound for Rent. That one only took about a year.
and so that's what you have to finish this book or another novel. And now you have another kind of in the hopper. Are you working on something next?
Yep, I have. So I have one, the Rebound for Rent, that's going out now with agents and publishers. I'm waiting to hear back. And the one I did this November is my first domestic suspense set in the Virgin Islands. So it'll be different.
Now, to research this, did you have to go to the Virgin Islands?
I I go all the time to a little island called St. John. It's
Okay.
pristine. It's national forest, 70%. It's gorgeous. We snorkel. And remember I told you way back about the man from Myrtle Beach that
Right.
was older? When we broke up, I moved to St. John thinking I was going to write the great American novel, but I ran out of money and tucked my tail and came home a couple months later. But it was a great experience.
Where do you get your ideas from?
People watching, absorbing what they do, what they say, what I hear, what I smell, what I feel, what I do, people in my life. And I cook up I guess I have a vivid imagination.
Because one of the things I loved about your writing, and I loved it in the first book that I read, was your use of dialogue is so, so on target. It's like I
Thank
get to know the
you.
people by listening
Okay.
to them, rather than describing them. And I'll kind
Mhm.
of, if I can, put you on the spot a little bit, so people get a feel for the beautiful misfits. Do you
Mhm.
have maybe a short passage you could share with folks? Give us a feel for what it's about.
Sure, sure.
This
So
this is exciting, by the way. So people are watching this, instead of coming
now,
to one of Susan's autograph book signings or having a read, you're going to have your own reading, personalized reading. Go
thank
do
you
it.
for allowing this, Blaine. Now listen, I'm in dim lighting, plus my eyesight's, but I've got to put on another pair of glasses over these.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so just to preface this scene, it is when the main character's son has OD'd from something laced with fentanyl. Now, granted, most of the book is fun and lighthearted, but this is a sort of a poignant scene, and she's at his hospital bedside. Okay, so you see these.
You look lovely. Okay.
His name is Finley. Finley's monster had entered on tiptoes back when he was young and drug free with a sports future all but guaranteed. He never summoned this demon. Big Pharma pushed it, doctors prescribed it, and genetics pollinated it. Come on, sweet child, Josie said, and gently returned his hand, fearing any movement on his part could affect an outcome. Wake up and show them all how strong you are. I'm going to keep reading from your journal until they kick me out to do more tests. It's going to be fine, Finley. You've got this. You have it in you, so fight. Josie grabbed an extra blanket from a small closet and placed it over her son. Who knew if he could feel discomfort? But after all this time worrying if he was cold or hungry, it seemed the right thing to do. These small acts of love she wasn't allowed for so long. And then here is what she reads to him from the journal. My darling son, the machines do the work, the breathing. If they go, you go. This much they said. This much I'm struggling to believe. In the weeks after you were born, I'd kneel at your cradle and watch you breathe. Every night after you fed from my body and lay dry and cocooned, I counted your breaths. I had to, because sometimes you'd hesitate as if unsure what came next. I'd nudge the cradle and startle you into another gasp of existence. I did this every night until my knees grew raw on the cold hardwood floor and my sleep-starved eyes shut down. It seemed you were hesitant about this life outside of me, not sure you wanted the air that sustained, almost as if testing this world before it had a chance to do the same to you. Sometimes I never made it to my bed across the room. I'd awaken in a spill of moonlight, clumped and aching beneath your cradle, mouth dry and hanging open, foot kicking that oak siding just to keep you going. Now, more than 23 years later, I'm doing it again. We're back to this two-step, this tango, this breathing game. I'm counting the rise and falls of your chest and gently tapping the metal railings of your bed. The machine breathes and releases. It's a dance. It's a rhythm. That's all for now.
Well, no, not for now, but if folks don't want to hear what happens, and I encourage them to do so, they should get The Beautiful Misfits by Susan Reinhardt. And Susan, if folks want to get the book, how do they get it?
Well, they can go to their local bookstore in Asheville Malaprops, or they can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, just wherever they buy books. My publisher is Regal House Publishing. They're in Raleigh, and they can buy from the Regal House Publishing website as well.
And so if folks also want to follow you or what you're doing, best bet is the website or Facebook, or how do they find out about you?
I have Susan Reinhardt author Facebook page, and I'm on Twitter and Instagram under Susan Gambrell, my maiden name Reinhardt.
Okay,
And I follow back.
Okay, she does. You'll see one of the things that Susan does. She'll keep in touch with you, and
Yeah.
one of the things I love about having you as a friend is that if you're a friend with Susan Reinhardt, you're kind of a friend for life. So
That's right.
no, it's
unless you're mean, unless you're a mean person.
Okay, well, hopefully I don't fit into that.
No way.
Criteria. Susan, aside from writing, if you could be doing anything else, what else would you be doing? So you were a baton twirler, you were a unicycle rider, an actor. By the way, did you ever do any more acting?
Just a little bit, but not since the show.
Okay, you were so good in that.
I think it would be fun to do, but I haven't done it.
Is what?
Be in a play or something.
Oh, play, yeah. Oh, I think you'd be natural.
If I could have done anything, had any talent, it would have been to have been a figure skater and ice skater.
Okay, were you a figure skater and ice skater?
No.
Oh.
No. I could barely stand up.
Okay, it's fair time. Anyway, Susan, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this Blaine's World podcast. I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti. Hopefully I'll see everybody on the next show, whenever that'll be, on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, and listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And Susan, we will definitely have to get together again I'm going to sign off, but stay with me just after we sign off.
Okay, and thank you, Cappy.
Okay, and thank you for being my guest. Okay, so
You're
let me sign off
welcome.
here.